Stanford University.
I think the way that we want to close is to just even have you just sit for a moment and think about the space that you would like to bring these conversations. Maybe it's just to the dinner table, right? Maybe it's to your faculty, right? Maybe it's to your students. Maybe it's to your siblings, right? Are folks who are elders in your community that you haven't connected with in a while that you want to reconnect with in this way, in this conversation, right? Starting with something that is doable, not extra, just incorporating what we've already learned and just taking that next step in bringing others in. Maybe it's joining the Radical Dharma family and becoming part of the online community that Reverend Angel has seeded. Yes. But just take a moment and see where that commitment feels doable for you. And when you're ready, you can share it with us in the chat. And meanwhile, I have such appreciation for all of the work that you all are doing to bring this attention to your own healing, to your own process of healing backwards, to be able to be more present to the collective liberation and collective survival of us all. Thank you so much to Mia and to Tia, to Contemplation by Design, and for this beautiful space to be able to deepen into the kind of practices that we need in this moment. It's the question for the space that we're in. And so, one of the things that happens oftentimes in-person radical Dharma spaces is that when we surface, where do you want to bring this work to? There is almost always a group that's working on bringing it into the academy, almost always. And so one of the things that I have been thinking about, I'm only a second year in the tenure track. I was a visiting assistant professor for 3 years before this. And so I'm really just getting set up in this professional world. But one of the things that I would like to cultivate as I move forward are spaces for this conversation within Radical Dharma frameworks, because I think it's so needed. And I keep getting called to campuses to have these conversations and keep meeting people just like you who are really struggling on their own to be able to breach the kind of bureaucratic obstacles in our way to being able to create healthful communities in our campus lives. I feel like I've been very fortunate to have come to a campus at Vassar where people already knew about Reverend Angel's work before I even arrived. And the first year I was here, she was invited, totally not having to do with me, to give a talk on our college something day. And it was so incredibly artfully positioned by no design of anyone except the universe, because we had just had an incredibly violent incident, anti-Black racism, like a homicidal graffiti found in the library. I think Mia was there for that incident. And it was the second time it had happened in under a week or something like this. And Reverend Angel came the next week. I cannot tell you how important it is to have teacher, spirit guide folks who carry the Dharma and carry it out of practice spaces and into secular spaces, to be able to integrate those teachings into places that are so bereft, so dry, cracked earth, as Reverend Angel was talking about previously earlier in the year. And so as we are seeing how many of us are interested in this work, invested in this work, trying to bring this, I'm bringing the Radical Dharma 5 into my curriculum, into my syllabus. I teach very heavy things. And I'm noticing what mal effects that has on me as a human being, just holding all of that emotional space for processing such histories of horror, right? So instead of just being like, okay, so now that we're on Zoom, we're just gonna like transition right into this hard conversation, talking about how we hold space in our bodies for difficult conversations, acknowledging the transition into that conversation. So I invite students to join me for 5 minutes before class for a centering practice. So we can just have a little bit of time to find our feet, find our breath, find our dignity before moving into conversation about grief and loss, brutality and violence. I think having these small ways to create transition space for the kind of emotional labor that it takes to meet this work with our whole selves is just sustaining work for me, but I'm finding it sustaining work for them as well. And then beginning to build that conversation with spaces on the campus like Contemplative by Design. Like on our campus, it's the Office for Religious and Spiritual Life. And oftentimes there's not a Buddhist chaplain in residence. I might be being co-opted as the unofficial Buddhist chaplain at Vassar, but notwithstanding that option, right? How can we bring people to campus that are going to help give us the medicine that we need, give us the practical protocols to not just do contemplative approaches with meditation and yoga? That's not all we got, right? I don't actually do meditation per se with my students, but I do bring in embodied practices. Instead of after they do a heavy reading about the middle passage or something like this, instead of just saying, well, what did you think about the reading? Whew, throwing them into their heads for such a embodied experience, I say, how did you hold it? How did you experience the reading? I couldn't read it silently. I had to read it out loud to my partner. I had to call my mom. I had to put it down and take a nap, right? I could feel myself shutting down, so I had to go do something fun and then come back to it, right? What did you have to do to meet this reading with your whole self? Could you meet it with your whole self? What parts did you not bring to the table to get through this space of this reading? So bringing in some of the tools that we've just been using in the course of this workshop into the classroom is an incredibly powerful way to kind of break that mind-body dichotomy that we've learned is part of the kind of economy of learning, right? And it's just a consuming and dissemination, demand and supply chain, and really allowing our whole selves to be transformed by the process of our encounter with ourselves and each other and the material in the classroom. Not expecting that you will walk out the same. And giving the container of the classroom the space to be able to hold that transformation, which we know when we are changing, we need support. We need to be held with love, not punitive limitations, which is important right now, especially because so many of our students are dealing with incredibly challenging obstacles to just being focused. If folks have questions about how they can apply this work to the spaces and places that they are committing to bring them to, challenges that they're, obstacles that they're anticipating along the way that they just want to workshop or think through. The question in the chat is resonant with me because I live in a rural space right now that's predominantly white. And if I go just a little bit outside the townships that I'm in, it becomes completely white, pretty much. So Frumi, I believe, said, can you say something about working in all white rural communities where many of the concepts of white privilege are more abstract than clear? Thank you so much. So where do you begin? And I have to say, I'm probably not the expert on speaking to all white communities because I don't tend to put myself in those communities if I can help it, I guess, because it can be really hard. I think the best people to be advocating for this work are folks who are in white skin, right? Who are going to be able to hold what comes up there. There's something to be said for doing this work in affinity groups and affinity spaces. There are really incredible resources for doing anti-racism training, just like 101 work. The People's Institute for Undoing Racism is an incredible resource. I've been through their training. We've brought them to Vassar. And so I would encourage you to reach out to them to bring in trainers from the People's Institute. They've been doing this for years. And some of their facilitators are white folks, and they really do hone their facilitation to the communities that they're facilitating with. It's a one-off, it's an introduction, it's a beginning, right? So giving people the tools, some of the tools that are laid out in the Undoing Racism trainings are really starting to break down the relationship between white supremacy and privilege, just so people start to understand it. One of the things that I find limiting about their trainings, and I'll say this, is that oftentimes we are given structural analyses of white supremacy, but then held personally responsible for changing it all by ourselves, or personally shamed for the ways that we haven't yet. There are also limitations to being able to do this work just in your head. And in the Radical Dharma Framework for Liberation, we've been very, very clear that it's important to get out of your head. So it's a good starting place, but I would really encourage folks to bring us to the spaces where you're finding the most, or bring people in our networks into your communities to be able to break down that mind-body split that really makes it challenging, particularly for folks who haven't had to contend. In New York City, the great equalizer is public transportation. So, you end up rubbing shoulders with, not anymore, not now, but before COVID, rubbing shoulders with people from all walks. But in rural communities, it is very challenging. People are very isolated, and you're in your own little, conveyor belt of activities that can really limit how you are encountering difference. Right? And so bringing ourselves into relationship with the ways that white privilege, white supremacy is actually keeping us from our whole selves is the way that we begin, right? How do you begin to get your whole self? Is white supremacy, is white privilege working for you? These are the questions that I would ask folks. There's reading groups, right? So the kind of work that we've been doing through Radical Dharma all over the summer was indoctrinating people in the Radical Dharma 5 through a curriculum connected to reading practices. Reading, there were 5 books. I don't remember what all the 5 books were, but I think one of them was The New Jim Crow, right? Beginning to read books that awaken our minds, awaken our understandings of history. to the injustices that we have inherited so that we begin to account for what we might not have been able to understand before. And once we can begin to account for it, then we can start to heal in ourselves the wounds that those quote unquote privileges leave in their wake. Because, having been, having spent so many, the abolition of whiteness chapter that I wrote for Radical Dharma really came out of having been indoctrinated into predominantly white spaces for the majority of my life. And I have seen firsthand from the most privileged of white people how damaging white supremacy and the privileges of whiteness are to white people. This is not a game anyone is winning. And the more we're able to have that conversation with ourselves and each other, the further we'll be able to grow in solidarity and community with each other across lines of difference. And that will really help heal the wounds, right, that white supremacy and privilege leave in their wake, that keep a lot of times white folks from being able to see how they have skin in the game for addressing racial injustice. That folks don't need saving, that folks don't need you to control it, we do need apologies. We do need apologies, but that it's a process, right, of beginning to work in tandem for our collective liberation, rather than saying, "Hey, I'm sorry you don't have the privileges that I have. How can we get those for you?" That's not the narrative. That's not where we're at anymore. It's so clear that the privileges that we've been protecting and lifting up are actually not working for any of us, right? This kind of distribution of power is incredibly toxic. In terms of thinking about the negative effects that nobody's really winning here, the first person that comes to mind for me is of course 45, right? Like the epitome of what we're supposed to be fighting for in terms of like an icon of economic and political power. This is the personification of what this path this country has been meant to produce. He's exactly what we've been building up towards. He's not an aberration, and it's not working for him either, right? His own sense of lack of accountability to the health and welfare of others has led to his own becoming infected, right? The way that we have learned to care for ourselves and each other matters. It's not just about us. It becomes everyone else's through the interdependence and interconnections of us all. There are incredible stories that have surfaced in Radical Dharma spaces about the effects of patriarchy and white supremacy on white men. If you look at the reports on white men and suicide right now are so high. This is not a game anyone is winning. And we have to tell that story with all seriousness and admit the limits of the path that we say that we believed would work. We almost got there, y'all, right? We said so much that we believe in the Declaration of Independence, and yet practice and theory were not integrated, did not have integrity. And we're dealing with the contradictions of that right now. Right now. So beautiful to be facing, leaning into the discomfort of these contradictions and all of their effects, and seeing in here the grief, seeing in here and feeling the pain, sitting in here and feeling the overwhelm, and yet also being with each other and feeling the resonances of each other's grief and each other's pain and each other's overwhelm, and knowing that in that resonance, there is hope. There is hope because we are going to be able to continue to come back to the practices that keep us centered and grounded, that keep us present and coming back to each other. I am forever indebted to the work of Reverend Angel and Lama Rod for helping me believe that there is a different path for me than just being an academic and just trying to succeed as such. And that by becoming who my practice was training me to become, I'm actually answering all of the questions that everyone has of me, right? The work that I do here is not disconnected from my academic work. The work that I do on prison abolition is deeply connected to this work, because prison abolition, the freedom of political prisoners, the freedom of those who are caged, detained, is bound up in my own spiritual liberation. And so knowing that the answers that we seek are probably not going to be found in books, but will be found in community. And some of those communities might be in the academic spaces. So really deeply invested and indebted to the spaces that Tia Rich and Stanford are seeding. This is what I believe in. There is no outside of the implication of these structures of oppression. And therefore we have to find a way to heal from the inside out and to heal backwards for those generations that couldn't do the work before us, so that we can hand future generations a world that's a little bit better than the one that we were inheriting. So thank you all so much. I know this has been a long, long, long day, but it's been a joy to be with you all. And I'm just so honored to be able to share this space and share this conversation. And I hope that we can continue the conversation together.